It's that time of the year we start to look at the prospects for the 2025 NBA draft. We're going to be talking about Derik Queen. We're going to be talking about Asa Newell. We're going to be talking about Cooper Flagg. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and from now on, I'm going to be taking up skipping as my primary mode of transport. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms, so subscribe and you'll never miss one of these NBA draft prospect scouting profiles as we go through a bunch of different, we don't go through them, well maybe we do, who knows. As we talk to a bunch of different NBA draft analysts, we look at the prospects, we talk about their weaknesses and strengths and where they might go and how they play in the NBA. I don't do a huge amount of talking about fantasy translation of that. I do a little bit of that sort of stuff, but this is the basis stuff. Then we move into the draft, then we move into dynasty stuff after that. It's all about building that knowledge base, and that's where we begin by talking about that right here. It is, of course, International Tea Day, so get your tea bags out, start teabagging, and grab yourself a nice hot cup of tea. Unfortunately for me, I already made my coffee before I figured out that it was International Tea Day. But you know what? That's okay. We're going to get in and we're going to talk about these draft prospects. Like I said, we're going to talk Derik Queen. We're going to talk about old mate Cooper Flagg. We have got Asa Newell. We've got Labaron Philon. We have got Hansen Yang as well. They are the five guys that we're talking about on this show. So, hey, stick around. We'll get into it. So to talk about these players, these five guys we're going to be talking about in this episode, I have brought in a guy who's been on this show many, many times in the past. He's here to talk about the NBA draft with me. It is, of course, the one and only Ben Pfeifer. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Always enjoy this part of my year doing the draft podcast rounds. Always excited to talk about that. I think we got a fun group for the ones we're going to talk about today.
Well, you're the first draft analyst I'm having on for this series this season, and I'll get this out of the way now. I'm not going to ask this to everybody, but I'll ask it now. But like, there's always going to be the comparisons. People go, well, last year wasn't actually that bad. It was a lot of good players, and maybe this year's not as good. There's always people trying to push back against this idea. I think it's garbage. I think this class is incredibly, significantly better than the group that we saw last season. It's hard to always put numbers on it, but there's a lot of those guys who were in top five last season or even made the all-rookie first team that wouldn't go in the top five in this draft. There's a lot of that sort of stuff. So do you agree with that sentiment? This is just streets ahead of where we were last season.
I do, absolutely. And I've seen some, like you said, I've seen plenty of pushback there. People being like, oh, there's some real gems in last year's class. And like there are going to be good players out of last year's class, for sure. But there are just so many. I mean, even beyond the fact that there are like not one but two like locked franchise guys to me in Flagg and Dylan Harper. There's so many interesting like high ceiling prospects when I feel like so many of the players that went high last year, like a Risa Share or Klingon, it's like this guy's got a pretty high floor. He's going to contribute, like a Reed Shepherd even, right? But there might not be a crazy ceiling. Whereas this year it's like, okay, maybe we're not as positive about what the role looks like for some of these guys, but like, man, if they hit, they're going to be stars. And there's obviously like weirdness with the depth of the draft because of like NIL and, all of the returning college basketball players. But I don't think that's as much of a thing about this draft. It's just like how drafts are going to trend going forward.
Yeah, that is going to be a thing. Is we're going to do this, and there's going to be players when we do these prospects, and there's going to be guys that decide they're going back to school because of the NIL money. So that is going to change the way that all of this stuff works. But it's not going to change this part of the show, which is a terrible segue, which is me telling you that I want to talk about someone, Ben, that you think... This is really interesting because I put this question out to... I think at the moment I've got 8 different draft analysts that are locked, and they've given me the names that they want to talk about. And I said, give me someone that you think is underrated versus consensus and overrated versus consensus. And the first 3 people that responded to me had this player. In different categories, mind you. They alternated. So he is going to be a really intriguing guy. You know who it is. It is. Well, I actually pushed the wrong button. He's not overrated according to you. He is underrated according to you. I'll push the button. I got to get that right as we just work through our teething issues. We're talking about Derik Queen from Maryland, who, again, there are people with some different opinions on where Queen is. Just give us I'll give you the brief overview. He is a big man who is an offensive force, an offensive hub, but there are defensive questions. How would you say that is like just a snapshot overview of Derik Queen?
Yeah, fair. Kind of like a bit of a positional weirdo, right? Like a little bit short for a center, definitely big for a 4, very skilled, has some traits that I think suit him really well to the 4, some that suit him really well to the 5, but he's certainly a bit of a unique, hard to kind of compare prospect. I think that's definitely led to why he is as polarizing as he is, like you said.
Yeah, because he's the sort of guy that, like, okay, so he's this player that in college he's got this great footwork and he can do back to the basket stuff and he can pass, and then you go, but can he defend? Or maybe he can defend, but can he protect the rim? But I'm not sure. But then where does that fit? And obviously the immediate people are going to look, well, not people, the immediate idea is going to be, well, look at Domantas Sabonis, look at Jokic, look at Şengün, look at Naz Reid, look at these sort of players who work as offensive big men. Now, there's obviously a big range there. We're talking about multi-time MVPs versus backup big men. And that is a big sort of difference in that level of outcome. So I'll start with Derik's defense. Is there a chance that it can work? Can it be because you can obviously work with Jokic in defense and he's improved a lot. And you can deal with it. Sabonis, sort of, but it's a different story. But then you get down to some other players and it becomes way more of an issue. Do you think the Queen's athleticism issues or maybe lack of vertical pop is going to cause an issue that's going to not allow him to be playable in big moments?
I don't think so. He certainly has defensive weaknesses, no doubt about that. And the main one of that to me is just his motor, right? Like he's going to have to convince teams that he wants to try and wants to fight on the defensive end, which is not something that I can really, comment on really definitively. And Queen does have issues as a vertical defender. He can't really jump that high, but he has some real high-level defensive strengths as well. His feet move really quick. He has a pretty impressive catalog of perimeter defensive possessions against guards this year. His hands are super quick. He gets a lot of just steals by jumping in passing lanes or, deflecting loose handles. And I think the path for Queen, I mean, like you said, we even look at a guy like Alperen Şengün, who you mentioned, who was a pretty atrocious defender early on in his career. And now that he's on a team with a bunch of great defenders and he's improved a lot, and he's been a guy who, maybe is never going to be like an all-NBA defender, but someone who can definitely be good. So Queen, well, I think he has real defensive limitations, and whatever his future team is going to need to be diligent with how they deploy him and how they build around him. I think there's absolutely context where he could be a positive defender, even if it's not, as much of a rock solid bet as, I don't know. I mentioned a Klingon before. It's you draft him, you expect him to be an impactful defender. Whereas Queen, it's there's a pretty wide range, but I do think at the positive end, there is a real world where he becomes a solid to good defender.
So in my first mock draft, which is the way that I do this process, Ben, is I come in and I've done a bit of research and let's bang out my first lottery mock, and then we focus it in, and I get in and I watch and I read and I listen and I talk, and then we narrow it down. But initially I put him at number 14 going to the Spurs because, defensive problems, right? He's got passing ability. Could Victor Wembanyama's defense offset that? Is he just solid enough to come in and work as a Montrezl Harrell type backup big man who just dominates second units as an offensive guy who helps with that passing and being that focal point there? Is he a guy that you need a Wembanyama level defender next to? Do you need an OG Anunoby perimeter type defender next to him? How does that work in terms of his strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I think honestly, you hit it on the head. I think the best kind of defender to pair with him is a rangy 5-man, which obviously there's only so many of those in the league, but there's definitely more and more of them as we see this archetype become more popular and more, young, tall players grow up developing more perimeter defense and offense skills. The Wembanyama fit is just perfect. I absolutely love that idea. For a bit of a scaled down option, I really would like him at 6 to Washington to play with Alex Sarr, who obviously is not Wembanyama, right? But he's another rangy, athletic defensive 5 who protects the rim and isn't the best scorer, but that's what Queen is going to bring. He's going to be an incredible scorer. He's going to pass, and I think that's kind of getting back to what I said before, right? Where certain teams are just going to have a tough time maximizing Queen on defense, but if he gets to the right team, and, you can kind of siphon his defensive role, right? You can see in the playoffs, especially, like a lot of teams shrink the floor and switch a lot. And the strength and the physicality really matters. So I think there's a lot of ways that Queen can end up being a positive contributor on defense, even though I don't think it's like a guarantee or anything by any means.
I don't want to harp too much on needies, but I think the positives are there. We know he can pass. We know that his footwork is great. We know he can work offensively in terms of post moves and all that sort of stuff. Can he shoot?
Maybe, but also I don't really think it matters that much, to be perfectly honest, because I view Queen at his high end as a legitimate on-ball creator who can, score and who can really create advantages, score in the paint. Obviously, he's an elite finisher, elite scorer in the paint. His mid-range touch is really promising. I think there's an okay chance he shoots, honestly. Like, his mid-range touch is excellent. He's already shown his ability to hit pull-ups in that area. He started taking a few more threes at the end of the season. Like, Queen, part of why I think his shooting projection is promising is that I don't think he needs to be a great shooter to be a good offensive player, right? Like, even if he's just a player who you leave him open, he'll knock down catch and shoot threes. Obviously a very different archetype of player, but even I think about like a Arkansas Jalen Williams on the Thunder, who has some body type similarities and is not a dynamic shooter by any means. He wasn't in college, but he's someone who will knock down an open three if you leave it to him. And obviously Queen has the, far superior athleticism and handle and passing to capitalize on that. So if I had to bet on Queen's being a good shooter, I probably would bet against it. But I think it's totally possible that he ends up being a solid shooter, and even more possible that he ends up being an excellent player, even without the good jumper, because of all of his other great skills.
We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the one and only Cooper Flagg, as well as a guy that you think is overrated in this class. But before I do that, today's episode, it is brought to you by Skims. Skims now makes underwear for men. I'm sure that you have seen it with women, you've seen it on TV, your partner, your friend, your sister, whoever. Maybe you've worn it yourself. That's okay, whatever you want to do. But now there is Skims for men in the most comfortable underwear that you can find. So many different styles, boxers, briefs, the old hybrid boxer brief as well. Skims has got multiple colors, multiple styles, and once you try on a pair of Skims, you're going to love it. You're not going to want any other type of underwear to be caressing your high-level prospects. So, shop Skims Men's at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and at Skims stores, and let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, you select podcast in the survey and you select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA basketball. All right. So, Ben, now we can dig into talking about Cooper Flagg. And this is, I think I found a similar sort of thing when we talked about Victor Wembanyama back in that draft. It's I'm not really sure what you say when you're talking about a guy like this. It's okay, Cooper Flagg is going to be the number 1 overall pick. Cooper Flagg had some questions, I guess, coming into college about what about his offense and what about his shooting, and he shot very well on his threes. He hit his free throws. He's an elite level defensive prospect. I'll ask you this question though. To me, I don't like player comps are not player comps. It's not about this guy's going to have this career. It's about what is the sort of style of player. And to me, that the idea of Cooper Flagg and the sort of stuff that he can potentially bring is we're talking about a Kevin Garnett level of player defensively with more shooting, which KG would have done had he been around in this sort of an era. But is the ceiling for him, for Cooper Flagg, is it as a better offensive player or as a better defensive player?
Probably, oh man, that's a good question. I really do think it can be on offense. I mean, maybe that's just because of the value of individual offense versus individual defense. Like Garnett, like you said, or stylistically, I've even compared him a lot to a guy like Jayson Tatum, who maybe isn't the high volume, high efficiency scorer, but like his incredible versatility and defense and passing and handling and shooting and all that, like makes him a guy who's making first team All NBA every year. And I think Cooper is that kind of player who, like you said, a lot of questions about, I don't know about a lot of questions. There were some questions about, his offense, what can he do? And then he averages like an efficient 22 points, shooting 38% from three on high usage. And it's like, oh yeah, this guy's actually a really damn good offensive player who improved a lot throughout the season. I think he's definitely more like strength based than a guy like Tatum, right? Where obviously he's gonna add a ton of strength as he grows and as he gets better. But he's just like a crazy worker, competitor with special athleticism. He's one of the very best passers in the draft as well, which is kind of underdiscussed. Like, I feel like Flagg, like you said with Wemby, right? Like someone I haven't thought about in a minute just because there isn't so much to think about. Whereas, we're with all these other prospects, like debating where they rank on a board, or their floor or ceiling, or, their best fits. Whereas with Cooper, it's like, we already did. I did this a year ago, and he kind of is everything that we thought and more. So I think Flagg, while he's his realistic ceiling probably on defense is higher, just because like I think it's very conceivable that he ends up being like an all defense first guy year over year with the way that he can protect the rim and defend the ball and rotate off the ball. But yeah, I mean, if he can really continue tightening his handle, become an elite pull-up shot maker, which he's shown the flashes to do, and he's going to be so good like without the ball. He's a great cutter, rebounder, screener, off-ball shooter, and driver. Like, there just isn't a lot that Cooper Flagg can't do.
The next part of that is that, okay, and I know the answer to this, but I think that it will be a question that maybe gets asked by some people, is that we saw a number one pick out of Duke in 2019 in Zion Williamson, who posted insane block and steal numbers coming out of college. And to say that Zion's defense has maybe not been at an elite level in the NBA would be a fair way of putting it. Flagg averaged 1.7 steals, 1.6 blocks per 36 minutes, which are not as good as Zion's numbers defensively. But when we talk about those numbers, and we've seen a lot of these sort of players who put up big defensive numbers in college and then can struggle coming into the NBA. And the names that always come to mind to me always seem to be Duke players, which is interesting because Kyle Filipowski put up these huge block numbers last season and then blocked one shot total in the NBA last season. And I don't know.
You really only blocked one shot last year?
He didn't, but he averaged like, I'm gonna look it up when we
I was going to say, I believe you for a second.
He didn't block many shots. I'll look it up. But like all these Duke guys would put up these big defensive numbers and then that didn't work in the NBA. There's no fear of that with Flagg, is there? He's not like hey, I've put up defensive numbers because I'm just more athletic than everybody in college. I'm putting up defensive numbers because I'm an elite defender.
Zion was, even a player who I think has hit like his 0th percentile defensive outcome, where, because of the conditioning and some of the motor stuff, right? Like he just never, became the defender. But Zion, even at Duke when he was great, was always so much more boom bust than Flagg, right? He was flying around, making incredible plays, blocking corner threes, but Flagg has like the play-to-play consistency that Zion just didn't, where Flagg is still making these highlight blocks and steals and, shutting guys down on the ball, but he's consistently rotating and help every possession. He's always in the right spot on defense. So he can gamble sometimes, and sometimes he'll like zone out, but every freshman does that. And Flagg does it far less often than most high caliber freshmen, especially ones that had his kind of offensive responsibility. Like he was the primary offensive guy for that team and their, most important defensive weapon. And I think that's really important and kind of undervalued, and like how much like mental load he had to kind of harbor as like, you're the main guy on offense and defense. And that's like not something a lot of NBA players have to do, right? And Flagg was able to do that in college. And yeah, I mean, even though the block and steal numbers like aren't, they're great for Flagg, but they aren't like all-time great. I think those kind of numbers to me are more just like indicators of like, athletic tools and instincts rather than like actual defensive ability, where, I mean, you throw on any tape of Flagg this year and you'll see him wrecking plays where he doesn't even get a box score stat.
Yeah, and that's the difference, is because there could be players in college who generate gigantic steal numbers through athleticism alone, but they get to the NBA and that they're good players, but they don't do anything like that.
I think of a guy like Thibault, who like the biggest boom bust defender of all time, right? Like historic steal numbers, had some really great seasons in the NBA on defense, but also had some really bad seasons in the NBA on defense just because of the play style. And Flagg is not like that.
The other one of those guys who had gigantic defensive numbers in college that didn't really happen that way in the NBA is Ryan Dunn, who put up these huge block and steal numbers and then barely blocked a shot. By the way, I got Filipowski's block numbers. He had 15 total blocks, but but he had 8 of those 15 in the final 6 games of the season. So prior to that, he had 7 blocks. If you weren't paying attention to Jazz April basketball, he'd had 7 blocks in the previous.
Yeah, I can't say I was, but yeah, Filipowski, that's crazy. That's wild. I can't. But point being, Flagg's not going to be like that.
I don't think we need to talk that much about Cooper Flagg. In terms of from a fantasy point of view, I think that there's a real shot that he could be a top 50 guy immediately, and then he'll consistently be a top 10 guy after that. I'm very, very confident, much like I was with Wembanyama, about what this guy is going to be from a production standpoint.
Stat sheet stuffer, efficient, does everything well. All
right, so look, you mentioned this is the last thing. You mentioned Jayson Tatum, right? I think that the absolute say elite level outcome here for Flagg is Jayson Tatum, but with a mix of Andre Kirilenko. Put in there, and if you get that player, I think you know what sort of a player that's going to be. That's a top 3 player, top 5 player in the NBA, pretty comfortably, without really too much of a concern. Let's talk overrated. The guy that you have here as an overrated prospect, Ben, is a guy that when I first did my mock draft, I mispronounced his name because I'm an idiot. So we're talking about. Now, I always like to be correct on this if I'm wrong. Asa Newell, is that correct pronunciation? So Asa Newell. So we're talking about a 6'10", 6'11" power forward whose primary focus is defense. And to me, on the surface, I look at this sort of guy, go, okay, 1.2 steals, 1.2 blocks per 36, 29% from 3. That's not ideal. You rebound okay, but you're that sort of guy where I go, okay, could you be a stretch 4? Could you be that defensive player, very similar to the way that I've got high hopes for what Noah Clowney can become, or I've got high hopes, maybe Taylor Hendricks can do this. These sort of players who can play the 4, maybe they play up at the 5, they can protect the rim, they can do weak side, they can maybe get a little bit of scoring happening, maybe they can be a spot up corner guy. That's how I think he can. But also, most of those guys have just done nothing over the course of their early part of their career, even though I like the archetype. So what are you down? Are you just this guy is never going to shoot, or he's never going to do anything offensively?
Yeah, my main worries with Newell are, my main contention with Newell being overrated is when we're thinking about him as a top 10 lottery pick in a strong draft. I see him as a role player at the next level, and I could certainly see him being a solid one. His defense is quite solid, especially on the perimeter for his size, and he's a great rebounder and can finish, but yeah, for shorter big men who don't shoot threes at a high clip and don't pass the ball often don't turn out well. I give Marvin Bagley as the example of this. Not saying Ace is going to turn into Marvin Bagley, but that's a guy who added very little shooting or playmaking value despite great athleticism and some defensive flashes, and couldn't end up working out. And if you look at the guys who had as few assists as Asa Newell did in college and still worked out, you're looking at monster, shooters like a Miles Turner or a Lauri Markkanen, or really tall big guys like a Jakob Poeltl or something like that. It's just not a ton of success for these types of big men, and the playmaking thing is the most worrying. I think Newell could be a guy who hits open threes. It wouldn't shock me. 5 attempts per 100, solid free throw numbers. Doesn't really shoot any pull up mid ranges or any mid range jumpers or anything, but has a great touch on his push shots and floaters. But to me, I see his ceiling as more of a role player, a complementary player, somebody who, maybe can be your 5th starter, but to me is most likely a bench guy, someone who you can add value as a switch defender. I think that's probably my favorite thing about Newell is I really like his potential as a switch big in the NBA. Obviously, a lot of schemes rely on that, and he's a good rebounder. He's got a high motor. He's going to finish plays. He's going to be reliable, but when we're talking about a top 10 type lottery pick, I'm looking for guys with upside or someone who I'm sure is going to be like a high impact starter. And while Newell certainly has some interesting traits and like his production as a freshman was phenomenal in the SEC, there's no doubting that. I just don't have a ton of confidence in how that fully translates to the league.
I think that, like, yeah, I don't think I would have him as a top 10 player, but I'm also, like, at this stage of looking at the draft and covering the NBA for this period of time, I just think if you can get a guy at 12 or at 15 who you can go, well, maybe this guy plays 6 years, 7 years for me, and he's at 25 minutes a night, and he starts when I need him, and he can come off the bench, and if it's a good team, he plays 22 minutes. If it's a worse team, he can play more. It's actually really useful because, like, how many guys do get picked in the top 10 who just, like, do nothing? Like, shout out to James Bouknight. Like, these guys just do nothing. Like, Johnny Davis is out here getting salary dumped in year 2. Like, players do nothing. And at time, like, obviously you want to hit the ceiling, right? You want to go, hey, can I get a multi-time All-Star at pick 10? That would be great. I would love that. I'd love to get Tyrese Halliburton at pick 11 again. Fantastic. But the reality is, if you can get a contributor who's a 6 or 7 year at minimum rotation / hybrid starter who does the things, he's not a star, he's your 5th guy, he does things defensively, he works on his offense and does things, and you go, okay, that's pretty useful. Like, again, I'll bring this name up, and these aren't the same players, but OG Anunoby went late in his draft, 23, the knee injury, all that sort of stuff. This year he's sort of ramped his usage up a little bit, but in the past he's just been a guy that, hey, do the defensive stuff, my guy. Don't worry about offense, and fit in and do the thing. Now, Newell, he's not that, I don't view him that way, but that's still, like, that's such a valuable player. It's not star upside, but it's an incredibly valuable sort of guy. So, like, I know there's the balance, I guess, of do you want to swing for that fence, or are you okay just going, no, this fits, and then we'll get other guys to fit around it.
For sure. And because of I agree with that assessment. And that to me is just like more of like a late first round type of player, because I don't think he's a guarantee to be like a 6-7 year start. I mean, I didn't think you were implying him to be, but we're talking about that. That to me is about his ceiling, where if he hits his ceiling, I totally agree that he can be a really valuable, just steady contributor, someone who you can rely on, someone who isn't going to make a ton of mistakes probably, and somebody who, isn't going to get like played off the floor in any way, aside from, maybe like high leverage playoff situations. But I think there's also a world where Newell's offense is just like not up to bat, right? Where I think he's, going to be a good finisher, good rebounder, but if he hits a low end shooting outcome, or if the playmaking or creation stuff are really inhibiting, or if, maybe the added size and length of the NBA level just like makes it so he's just a good finisher and not an elite finisher, right? So it's like, how good is his profile if you're projecting a guy as just a good finisher rather than an elite one? I think I've learned over the years with guys like Onyeka Okongwu and Jalen Duren, like how much size does matter for big man prospects. And I definitely think about that with Newell, where I don't view him as much of a guy with perimeter skills. So he's got to have the big man stuff. And I'm just not fully confident in him getting that. But I do think, like you said, there is a good chance he ends up as just like a solid rotation piece, which at some point in the first round, like depending on your team context, I think is definitely worth betting on.
We've got a couple more guys we're going to talk about. We'll come back to talk about Labaron Philon and Hansen Yang. Before I do that, though, today's episode, it is brought to you by Car Gurus. And when you're shopping for a car, it should be fun. It should be exciting. You're buying a car. Like, that's cool. But often there are confusing prices. There are hidden fees, and it can all feel very overwhelming. And that is why Car Gurus is the place to go to cut through that noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. They've got over 4 million listings at Car Gurus, more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the US. They verify the dealers. They provide real price analysis and give you the tools and the data that you need to make the right choice without second guessing yourself. They've got in-depth vehicle details giving you peace of mind before stepping onto any lot. Plus, the price drop alerts show you exactly when the perfect car is available for your budget. So buy or sell your next car today at Car Gurus or at cargurus.com. Go to cargurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That is cargurus.com, cargurus.com. All right, let's get into these last two guys. We're going to rapid fire these last two prospects. We will start here, Ben, by looking at the guard out of Alabama. will go to Labaron Philon, which is to me, it's a confusing name to read because obviously you just automatically go, oh, LeBron. No, Labaron. Labaron. It's a great name. Philon's a great surname. Labaron's a great first name. So he's got already that huge W in his pocket. But there's a few of these guys in this draft where you go, okay, there's some exciting stuff here. He averaged 2 steals and 5.5 assists per 36 minutes, but under 32% shooting. Is that like that's I mean, like, oh, okay, you're a guard, you're 6'4", like, yeah, he's not super small, but he's not super big. Like, is that the problem? Is that shooting deficiency a real concern and a turn off for him?
It's definitely somewhat of a concern, but not my main concern. My main concern with Philon from an offensive standpoint would be his finishing and his scoring at the basket. Whereas for his shooting, like the numbers weren't great. But if we look at the other indicators, like his free throw percentage was good. He was a great, long mid-range shooter. He was a more effective three-point shooter in high school than he was in college, which of course, isn't everything, but should be added onto the sample. But Philon to me is like one of the more interesting, like underrated upside swings in this class where he's a frail guy and the shooting and some of the scoring stuff obviously needs work, but there just aren't a lot of players at his height who can like change directions and have the juice that Philon does with the ball. I think he can be a really dynamic advantage creator at the next level. He's a great passer. He's a great defender. And he has a lot of experience playing different roles where he obviously had to be like a role player for this Alabama team as like a connecting guard, but he's been a star at like the high school level, done different things in different roles. But yeah, just like the finishing, very poor finisher, like below 50% at the rim in the half court, can't get up much, but I think his touch is solid, and a lot of it, of course, just like it does for so many players, is going to depend a lot on just how they can improve their strength and their physicality as they get older.
I just realized on this graphic I forgot to change the Georgia symbol out for Alabama, so I apologize to all Alabama fans. I apologize to Georgia fans. I apologize to anyone who's completely crazy about that. Yes, I know he went to Alabama. I apologize that G is there. It should be an A. Just imagine it's there. Just tape it onto your screen or something. He's one of those guys again that like we've seen these sort of frail, smallish sort of guards. Are they a point guard? Are they a two? Come in the last couple of years, like Bones Highland, one of those sort of players. I'm not saying they're the same sort of guy, but that guy, maybe look, there's the flash, there's the excitement. Does it work? Can he hold up defensively? Can he do these things? And for Bones, it didn't work. And there's someone that was like that in the last year or two as well that I can't really remember. But anyway, there's a lot of these sort of players that come through who are this sort of college spark plug sort of guy that I think best case for Philon is probably as a bench guard, as an offensive sort of guy that can come in and just provide that little bit of a spark and that ball handling ability. Now, we see those steal numbers, right? You can see that they're big. 2 steals per 36 is huge. And we talked about that earlier with Cooper Flagg. Is this a case where Labaron Philon is getting steals at this level because he's a great defender, or is he getting them because of an athletic advantage? And often, a player like this who's a smaller guard who had big steal numbers in college, who's not a big steals guy or defender now, is Donovan Mitchell, right? He did that, but that steal number translated him to being a great real-life NBA player.
Yeah.
Is Philon doing that through, Alex Caruso's type positioning and anticipation, or is he doing it through athletic gifts and that's not really going to be a thing for him?
I do think he's an excellent defender, but like I said, the strength to me is the main limiting factor in the frame. Like, he will get absolutely flattened on some screens just because, like, he's anticipating. He's got the feet and the agility to get around him, but there's just some players who are just going to wall him off because he's super skinny and doesn't have functional strength. But outside of that, I'd say I'm quite confident in his defense. Like the steal numbers, great hands, great anticipation, so quick when he gets to sit down in his stance. And when he doesn't get clobbered by those, his screen navigation is very like boom or bust. He's either getting clobbered by a guy and ending up on his ass, or he's sticking to a guard like glue and not letting him get anything. So I think similar to his offense for me, where there's certainly a world where Philon doesn't really work as a defender, but I could also see a world where he adds strength, where he continues to work on his screen navigation and becomes a legitimately excellent NBA defender. But like you said, I think like the steal numbers, a lot of the statistical indicators for him just kind of point to the fact that he does have some pretty impressive athletic traits, those being right, like the burst, the quick twitch movements, and his ability to change directions and like glide is something I value a lot for projecting defenders. And I think Philon definitely has those traits.
Last guy we're going to talk about is the big man out of China. If you're full of you Qingdao Eagles fans, you know about Hansen Yang. He's big. He is 7'2" plus. He blocked a lot of shots in China. He's almost 20 years of age, averaged 17 and 11 per 36. 3 blocks a game. He just can't really shoot, but is this one of these guys again that we're talking about that maybe there's some flash there? Is he just blocking shots because he is literally a foot taller than everybody else in that league, or is he like a good positioning guy? Is he a player that you think can develop more, or is he just going to be like woefully sort of out of position, out of like just can only play drop and has struggles on anything else in the NBA with that level of athleticism against him?
I definitely worry about his athleticism at the NBA level. I'm certainly not as big of a fan of his as some people are, but I do think his shot blocking talent is pretty legit. Like he's going to be a guy who, like you said, just an enormous human being who to me tracks the ball really well while he's going for blocks. He's got good timing, not like an explosive player by anything. And I think though he's not a great mover, and I do worry about that, he has improved over the last couple years in terms of his like drop defense and his backpedaling and his pick and roll coverage. So maybe some potential there. But yeah, I think I view him as someone as more of like a second round flyer, as somebody who I think can, has some valuable traits, whether it's just like the size or the shot blocking. He's a nice passer as well, but not someone who, the hit rate on these like second round type international players are just really low. And I think there's, Yang, who I like, I think is definitely a fun player and has some real traits, but someone who I view as definitely more of like a long-term project.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, obviously, from a fantasy point of view, getting your 3 assists, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks is like an unbelievable combination. But like the reality of that is China League and the difference in size and athleticism that he's going to be facing when he comes across to the NBA. And look, all signs would point to like he comes over, he plays a little bit, doesn't work, he goes back to China. That's how this works for a lot of these second-round international prospects, and honestly, second-round American prospects as well. Just that doesn't hit. We've got such a small role there. Interestingly, when I'm trying to collate a lot of mock drafts and big boards, I think I've got about 4 or 5 so far that I've marked down in my database, and I think he was listed at 44 on like 4 of the 5. Like everyone just had him smack bang, middle of the second round, bang on number 44, which feels about right. Like usually I think the general consensus, Ben, is that after pick 45, it's like whatever. Like let's see what happens. Maybe we get something out of it. But like the top 45 is like, these are guys that we feel pretty good about being contributors. So he's sort of just sneaking in to that back end there. His shooting numbers, 29 from 3 without good free throws. I'm not really confident that's ever going to be a thing, and again, that's pretty limiting when you are that size and you have to be working down in the post. Like, okay, let's compare him to obviously different players, different level of prospects, but a guy with similar size who had some of these movement concerns, and Zach Edey last season.
I figured you were going to say that.
Yeah, so Edey comes in as the guy that is Yang the tallest prospect in this draft?
I think Zikarsky might be a
big Rocco,
notch taller.
What happened to Rocco, by the way? What happened to Rocco?
Fellow countryman?
What happened to him?
He just he didn't. I think this is the challenge with projecting really young players in small roles. Where like last year in the NBL, as a 17-year-old, Rocco played like 5 minutes a game and was unbelievable in those minutes. And then they try to scale him up to a bigger role this year, and it just doesn't work. I still have some Rocco stock. Like he's gigantic still. I think he moves all right, and he's got some, definitely some passing stuff that I like and some dribbling stuff. But I think I remember a guy like Donovan Clingan, who his freshman year wasn't a high minute guy. People were like, "Oh, is he going to translate to a higher minute role?" And he did. Yep. Some players do, some players don't. But yeah, I think Yang is certainly up. I mean, I'd imagine he's up there with like Kalkbrenner and Maluash and like those guys as the other tallest players in the draft. But I know he's shorter than Rocco.
Oh yeah, Maluash. Yeah, that's they're probably pretty similar actually. Yeah, but anyway, Yang, really limited. We'll see where it goes. It's interesting. I was gonna say these guys don't grow on trees. We know that there's like, what is it? I think there's like 1,000 people in the world who are 7 foot tall or more. So hey, if you got one who can sort of do something, you might want to see if
might as well take a flyer on.
If it works out, it works out, because they're literally just not around. You can't just go and find these guys of this size, and if it works, it works, and that would be great. But I tell you what does work, Ben. It's having you on this show to discuss the NBA draft, and we love having you here. So thank you again for coming on. But tell us what sort of stuff you've got going, the writing work that you're doing, your YouTube channel. Give that all a bit of a plug.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, Josh. Always a fun show, even though I'm like the worst fantasy basketball player ever. But yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter at BJPF, my YouTube channel, just my name, Ben Pfeifer, where I'm going to be posting a bunch of draft analysis, player breakdowns, comparisons, trends, and stuff. And I've got some cool projects I'm working on that I'll be writing about. Whether it's like I'm working on like a playmaking metric kind of thing that I'm hand tracking, and I'm just gonna be watching a lot of film and writing a lot about these players, doing scouting reports. So yeah, and thank you again, Josh, for the platform. Always enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. So
appreciate it, Ben. You've been on so many times, and your insights on these guys it's always really valued, and appreciate that. So go check out Ben's stuff, his YouTube, his writing, his Twitter, all that stuff. Thanks again, Ben. Once again, I do apologize for the Labaron Philon team logo mix-up. Embarrassing stuff. But that's okay. Michael Bolton should forgive me, and I hope you guys forgive me too. That is the end of that show on International Tea Day. Cooper Flagg, Derik Queen, Asa Newell, Labaron Philon, and Hansen Yang. The next show we're doing, we're going to be talking Ace Bailey. We're going to be talking Jeremiah Fears. We are going to be talking about Noah Pender, Tahad Pettiford, and Sion James, one of the funniest names to me in this draft. I don't know why it's so funny, but it is. That's okay. Subscribe, double bang. You'll never miss an episode that way. I think you guys know that. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.